All right, today we're actually going to skip lesson 3.3 part 1, and we're just going to focus on part 2. The part 1 was more about the linear versus nonlinear. We kind of mentioned that before. Our rate of change would have to be constant with the change of x and the change of y. But again, we're just going to focus on finding our slope, also called rate of change. So you got a few ways that it's presented to you. The first way, again, is when it's in the graph form. The graph form is mainly from 7th grade, and it's called rise over run. All you'd have to do is be able to make a right triangle, count the rise, count the run, and again, you just make it as a reduced fraction. So for example, if it was, let's say, 8 over 6, so a rise of 8 and a run of 6, you'd have to reduce that to be 4 over 3. So you count up 8, right 6, and so on. It can be the same thing if you have to count down 2, right 3. Well, negative 2 over 3 is already in its reduced fraction form. The slope, again, rate of change is constant. So like I was just saying, from 7th grade, rise over run, rise over run. You did that in 8th grade as well, but then we started changing it into using a formula and then also using the phrase change of y over change of x to get you ready for high school. So our slope, again, represented as letter M, change in y over change of x, rise over run. Now, if you have a data table, the key thing, again, is making sure that you count the change, but you have to do the change of y over change of x. A lot of students accidentally do x over y, and then they get the wrong slope. Again, 7th grade, rise over run. But the rise, remember, it could be counting up if it's a positive slope, or it can be counting down if it's a negative slope. And then you actually have two special slopes. If it's not an uphill or a downhill line, meaning if it's a horizontal, a vertical line, one of the two, you got to remember which one is actually 0 and then which one is actually undefined. And the key thing is about the location of the 0. If 0 is under the line, then it would be undefined. The formula from 8th grade, again, y2 subtract y1 over x2 subtract x1. So again, change of y over change of x. You don't have to sketch this, but just observe this would be a positive slope because reading left to right, it is going uphill. It is a constant rate of change, which means there's no dramatic increases or decreases. There's no curve to it or anything like that. It's just a normal looking line. And we say that the constant rate of change is our slope. So if you see those words interchangeable, essentially it's talking about the same thing. So on your quiz, it may say find the slope. It may say find the rate of change. Same thing. If you have a graph, again, all you have to do is look at 2 points. Doesn't matter which 2 points you look at, as long as you reduce. So if you practice with me, you don't have to sketch it, but just observe. The rise is 2 and the run is 1. So between these 2 points, the rise is 2 and the run is 1. If I look at the first point and the last point, the rise is 4 and the run is 2. But 4 divided by 2 is the same thing as 2 divided by 1, a constant rate of change of 2. Again, any 2 points you can use, but you just need to reduce them. So on your homework, it looks like we give you some points to use. On your assignment, you might have to identify the points on your own. And the key thing about the points is we want it at the corner of the boxes, not in the middle of the boxes, not on the edge of the box, at the corners. Corners are key there. All right, so looking at this one, just like on your assignment, find the slope from a graph. So again, don't worry about writing it down, just observe with me. I like going ahead and put my pencil right here on the most left dot, and then trying to travel to get to the dot on the more to the right side. Right away, we notice that example A is a negative slope because it is going downhill. You read left to right. So let's count our rise. So we put the pencil here. So rise would be 1, 2, 3. But since it's counting down, the rise would be negative 3. And then I travel to the right 1 box. So negative 3 over 1, which really becomes negative 3. On letter B, I notice that it's going uphill. Uphill, again, is a positive slope. So I put my pencil on the furthermost left dot, and I travel to get to the right dot. So again, I'm going to rise and then run. So rise, counting up. Let's see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So rise is 4. And then I run to the right. So let's see here. Right is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So rise 4, run 5, which means my slope is 4 over 5. No reducing required. So we are good. Again, you got problems like that just on your assignment 1, 2, 3, and 4. Nice, easy stuff for you guys. All right, you've got several points here, or several problems here, where you have your 2 points given to you, and you just need to find the slope. Now, if you did not have a coordinate plane, meaning you can't plot the points and just count your rise over run, you're going to go ahead and rely on your formula from 8th grade. The formula again is the slope is equal to y2 subtract y1 over x2 subtract x1. So the key thing is about really identifying. So at the beginning, if you notice, it says -2, 0. We're going to go ahead and keep that as x1 and y1. And as silly as it sounds, please do not separate that couple. They are so in love. Notice how it's x1, y1. The little ones have to stay together. And then the next loving couple is x2, y2. Again, don't split them up. And the reason I say that is because I've had students write it as x1, y2, and x2, y1, or even I've seen students x1, x2, y1, y2. Don't do that. Observe and participate. So once you've identified that information, you really just need to go ahead and do quick substitution and then order of operations. So if it says y2 subtract y1, well, I know looking at my identification that y2 is 5. So I'm going to write it as 5 subtract. And then I notice my y1 is 0. So I'm going to write it as 5 subtract 0 for my numerator. Remember, it's always rise over run. The y is the up and down movement, the y. And then at the bottom of my fraction, the denominator, it says x2 subtract x1. Well, x2 is 1, so I'm going to write it as 1 subtract. And then this part, be really careful. Remember, it says -2. So please write it as 1 subtract -2. And the reason I really specify that is because a lot of students would just write it as 1 subtract 2. Well, if we identified it correctly, it is -2, so 1 subtract -2. As we continue to work on this, meaning the order of operations concept, my numerator just says 5 subtract 0, simple 5. And then my denominator, remember it says 1 subtract -2. So you learned that in maybe 6th or 7th grade that it really becomes 1 plus 2. And 1 plus 2 is a nice 3. So our reduced form of our slope is 5 over 3. You cannot reduce it further, so you just keep it as 5 over 3. Now remember, that is an uphill line because it's a positive slope. So really trying to make some connections for stuff that we've already done, 7th grade, 8th grade, your IM1 first attempt, and now with me again. These problems here, we're not going to do them, but again, the concept is identifying. So remember, x1, y1, x2, y2. Always be careful if they have a negative sign. x1, y1, x2, y2. And the last one, x1, y1, x2, y2. So before we wrap things up, I just want to make you aware of on letter C and letter D. Just looking at it, I know that it's going to be one of the special answers. The special answers for the slope is either 0 or undefined. Now, if you notice on letter C, -1 is for the y, -1 is for the y, which means you'd have the same number at the numerator. It would be written as -1 subtract -1. And then on letter D, x is -2, x is -2. The same numbers for x1 and x2. So that means your denominator would be written as -2 subtract -2. And if you remember, -1 subtract -1, well, that's really -1 plus 1, which is 0. -2 subtract -2, it's really -2 plus 2, which is still 0. So thinking about it just really quick, if you were to do the whole problem for letter C, really just focusing on the numerator, come on, the numerator would become 0, because again, -1 subtract -1 is -1 plus 1, 0. On letter D, -2 subtract -2, -2 plus 2 is 0. So notice the difference. 0 is the numerator, 0 is the denominator. And you have to try and remember which one actually gives you an answer of 0 and which one gives you an undefined. And I shared it at the very beginning of the video. If 0 is under the line, it is undefined. So you're going to use that information to try and help you out and be awesome.